everyone, my name is Nikki. I'm the Opening Doors Project Coordinator for the University of Cambridge Museums. I'm here today to talk to you about Warm Welcome, Helping Everyone to Stay Safe, which is a short briefing that we've pulled together to think about how to welcome visitors coming into museum environments with the current climate of COVID and social distancing. For those of you that don't know, I work for the University of Cambridge Museums, which is a consortium of the 8 museums and the Botanic Garden that are associated with the University of Cambridge. There's a list of them on the screen there. They're spread out across the city of Cambridge. I also have a responsibility to work with other museums in the region, so it's other museums in the Eastern region. I'm also a trustee at the Cambridge Museum of Technology as well. Today's session, we're going to be looking at the local arrangements that you might have in your museum. That's the basis of where we're going to start. And then we're looking at why visitors might feel anxious about coming into museums and what we could do to help any anxieties that visitors might have. We're also going to look at what we can expect of our visitors, which is an interesting one, and also why people might not follow the guidelines that we set out. If those who aren't following the guidelines are coming into our museums, we're going to look at how we can ask them to follow our guidelines and stick to the rules that we've put in place. And then we're going to talk about any difficult situations that might arise and how to work with those difficult situations. So the aims of this session are to understand what we can do as individuals to help people feel safe when coming into museums, and also we'll be considering what to do when things don't quite go according to plan. Now, this session has come about from some sessions that I've been at with the Association of Leading Visitor Attractions, or ALVA, where they've been doing an awful lot of research into people who visit visitor attractions, and that's anything from museums, zoos, theme parks, all sorts of different things. The feedback that they've been getting is that people desperately want to visit. They really do want to visit. But one of the concerns that they have is an anxiety about coming into a institution, a museum, and also how other visitors might behave once they're in the space. So the first thing that we need to think about before starting any session, any front of house visitor focus session, is the local arrangements that your museum might have put in place. What we'd ask you to do is, before you start any session, is to familiarize yourselves in depth, not just a quick glance over, but properly know what your institution has done to make a visitor and their staff safe. So this could be anything from one-way systems, hand sanitisation, social distancing rules. But what we'd ask is to make sure that you are fully aware of those things. It's totally reasonable for a visitor to expect us to understand what these processes are. So if they ask us a question, they have every reason to expect us to be able to answer those questions quickly and easily. So why might some people feel anxious about visiting museums? This training is a sort of an offshoot, I guess, from something that we run at University of Cambridge Museums called Warm Welcome, and it's a longer 2-hour session. This one's not 2 hours, don't worry, it's only about 20 minutes. Part of that is we look at why people might not want to visit museums, or why they don't feel they can visit museums, and we go into depth about something called threshold anxiety, which some of you may have experienced in the past. I know I have, and threshold anxiety is a non-physical barrier that might stop you from going into an organisation. So if we think about, say, let's take the Fitzwilliam Museum, for instance. Beautiful museum, absolutely stunning, very grand building. But for somebody who perhaps isn't used to visiting museums, they may look at this building in itself and not see its beauty, but just see it as a big barrier. So first of all, you've got beautiful iron gates that are very spiky, covered in pineapples. Brilliant, where you get through those. And then you've got a very big grand staircase leading up to columns. that's a physical barrier in itself, but also potentially a psychological barrier as well. You walk up the steps into the portico of the museum, and then you're confronted with a very dark door, and it's difficult to see what's beyond that door, and it might act as a barrier to stop people from going in. Another museum that potentially could suffer from this type of anxiety could be, say, the Whipple Museum, where you physically have to walk through a department of the university to get to the museum. Somebody might look at this large round door down Free School Lane and think, am I allowed in there? It says department above the door. So we think about all these different things that could stop somebody from visiting. So threshold anxiety aside, if you then add the COVID virus on top of that, I think that probably takes threshold anxiety through the roof. So again, potentially not a physical barrier, but definitely a psychological barrier. Somebody might look at a museum and think, how do I know that I'm going to be safe in there? And so by understanding ourselves as front of house and visitor services, members of staff and volunteers, by understanding what our museums have put in place, I think it puts us in good place to actually be able to encourage visitors to break down that threshold anxiety and be that smiling face to encourage people to come in. So what can we do about this? What can we do about this threshold anxiety? In the normal warm welcome training that I do, we talk about body language and how we are physically able to hold ourselves to be able to look warm and welcoming to people, hence the warm welcome training. And we can do this by open body gestures and a smiling face. And we should continue to do that. We should still be welcoming people and smiling at people. But we need to also think about the barriers that could be in place that might prevent us from communicating in this way. So, for instance, we're talking at this point about PPE or personal protective equipment. Now, depending on the type of PPE that is supplied to you by your museum, lots of museums are going down the route of wearing a plastic visor over their faces, which is great, a really good way to communicate because you can mostly still see people's faces, although you might need to be careful if dealing with people who might have a form of blindness or visual disability in some way, because, so for instance, if you're standing with the sun reflecting on your face, that might reflect on the visor. With the standard face coverings that some of us might be wearing, you might have seen people in the street wearing them or in shops, that's very difficult to communicate with people. I don't know if you've experienced it yourself, I know I have. I've got a face visor here, a face covering here that I wear. And I'll put it on and I'll show you how it actually manages to muffle my voice and actually hide my mouth as well. So you can't actually see what my mouth is doing. Excuse me. So right now you can only see my eyes. I'm hoping you can hear me. It might be a little bit muffled, but you can't tell whether I'm smiling or frowning. Well, actually, you could probably tell if I was frowning. But what I try to do is try and smile with my eyes. I don't know whether you can see that. So that's one thing you might need to think about. Also, there's the standard or the universal online meeting greeting, which is the slightly frantic wave. Might feel a little bit daft, but actually the slightly frantic wave is quite useful when greeting people with a face covering on. I think it's also really important when we're in a position, a front of house position, when dealing with the public, it's vital that we are identifiable as members of staff or volunteers at that museum. That could be a fun way of having sort of your name or something written on your face visor, or a high-vis jacket or a badge, a visible badge of some sort, so that the public, if they do have questions that they want to ask, then they can identify you as somebody who is working at that museum at the time, so they can approach you and ask you questions. It's also vital that we say hello to people as they're arriving. So again, the slightly frantic hand wave and the goodbye to people as they're leaving. So whether you're on a desk sort of giving out tickets, it might be that your museum has gone down a pre-ticket only system, or you might have a paid ticket entry to come in, but it's vital that we say hello to them. And if you're walking around the museum and you see people leaving, it's vital you say goodbye to them as well, just making them feel warm and fuzzy. It might be that some of these people have booked tickets in advance and might be hovering outside, still a little bit unsure about whether to come in. And if we are open and welcoming to these people, it could again encourage them to come in. So what can we expect of our visitor? I think since lockdown started, you've probably all seen signs on supermarkets if you've managed to get out to a supermarket or a shop. And the signs on the outside of them say that you must be well when you enter the museum. So when you enter the shop, sorry. So when you walk in, we expect you to not be experiencing any of the signs of COVID. So high temperature, persistent cough, or lack of taste and smell, loss of taste and smell. So we'd ask people that they're well before they come in. We also ask that they comply with the measures that we have put in place. So that might be a one-way system, or it might be asking people to sanitize their hands as they come in. It might be also that we ask people to keep their coats with them. We'll also ask everyone that they maintain physical or social distancing from everyone they do not live with or in a bubble with. Now, it might be that the 2 metres that we've chosen to put into place in many of the museums is different from how it is outside of the museum. So you see the hospitality trade has just started reopening and they have reduced down to 1 metre plus, and the plus being all the other measures that they can put in place. But I think it's a good idea for museums to stick to the 2 metre rule, if anything, because we can. So we need to think about why visitors might not follow these rules. The anecdotal evidence is often this is due to forgetfulness, and we must always presume that this is due to forgetfulness or, sort of a slight lapse in concentration. I've done it. I've been walking with a friend, and I've realised I've all of a sudden drifted a little bit too close for her. To her. My mother has done it to me several times before we were able to get close. I remember walking with her, and again she drifted close, and I'd say, "Oh, hello, 2 metres, mum." And it was always quite amusing because she sort of come back into herself and say, "Oh, sorry about that." So we would then sort of maintain the 2 metre distancing. Very, very, very rarely, and I've never actually seen it, would this actually be a malicious act. But we must also be mindful that we may be communicating with people who may not understand the 2 metre rule down to cognitive differences. Now, there is no one specific way to communicate with somebody who has a learning, sensory, or individual difference. So instead, we need to think about different ways in which we can communicate these things. So different words and phrases that we can use to be able to encourage somebody to stick to the 2 metre rule, and even physical body movements to show that we might be needing to stick to the 2 metre rule. Useful phrases to use when talking to people about sticking to the 2 metres is we want to go down a route of positive politeness here, or the positive reinforcement is important. We also need to think when communicating with the public, nobody likes to be criticised or feel like they're being told off in any way. And that's not the route that we want to go down, because remember, we're presuming that pretty much everyone, in fact, everyone who has is breaking the 2 metre distance rule has just forgotten. So instead, we're going to do it in a positive politeness way and a positive reinforcement way. So the phrases that I like to use are, let's be safe, keep your distance. And then perhaps again, if they're not sticking to it again, could you please stick to our physical distancing rules, thank you. Or you can use social distancing rules. And if they're not obeying the rules even by then, maybe a little bit more firmer but still polite, I would appreciate it if you would if you would respect the 2 metre rule, thank you. Hopefully, after being reminded 3 times, people might understand that there is a rule there for a reason, and that we're asking them to stick to it. So difficult situations that might arise. I mean, in anyone who's worked in a front of house capacity may very well have come across difficult situations, and these can often be sparked by the behaviour of other visitors, a lack of understanding of new visiting procedures, a lack of information, poor service, fear and anxiety. So these things could be another visitor not obeying the rules and getting too close to them. It could be some frustration at perhaps a one-way system being put into place, a lack of information. I mean, I've seen some websites, luckily not in our museums or our heritage sector, where they haven't actually even updated their website since before lockdown. So the information on the website is pre-COVID, which is slightly strange. A poor service, I would see that as the volunteers and members of staff not being aware of what procedures have been put in place and having the right information. And anxiety and fear, I guess they're a result of all the above things that can feed into making someone feel a bit anxious. So with regards to how to resolve difficult situations, we need to be very mindful here that if somebody's coming to you with a complaint or is angry or anxious about something, that it's their physical emotion that they're feeling. Everyone has a different perceived level of risk. Some people's perceived level of risk is very high and perhaps won't go out at all. Others is very low. So for instance, you probably saw the pictures of when the pubs started reopening in London and Soho. People seemed to be standing very close together. I'm aware of how photographers can pose a photo. So what we need to do is actively listen to the individual without interrupting, and you need to acknowledge the situation. Active listening is really important when dealing with visitors, and you can look up online. If you Google active listening, there's lots of different bits of information about it, but it's a time where you are properly concentrating on what somebody is saying to understand what the challenges are. It might be that when this visitor comes to you with a complaint or a concern or is anxious or fearful in any way, that you might need to move them to another area of the museum where you can hear what they're saying and still maintain the 2-meter distance rule. As you're listening to them, it's great if you can empathise with them, but don't sympathise. Empathy and sympathy are two very different things. To sympathise with somebody would be, say, going along the lines of, oh, I know, isn't it awful? Yes, I feel that too. It really bugs me when people get too close. That has the ability to change the complaint around to your emotions. And this isn't about you, this is about them. It also has the possibility of turning into a little bit of a whinge fest, which is never good when you're dealing with a complaint, because you can add fuel to the fire and make things worse. But to empathise is to listen to somebody and understand what they're talking about, understand where they're coming from. Even if you don't agree with them, you're still understanding what they're saying. And you can gain that through the active listening techniques. If you have to answer a complaint, it's always best, if you know the answer, or if the complaint is a very specific reason, to explain the reasons why something might be in place, like a procedure might be in place. And think hypothetically, it might be that your museum has a one-way system. Somebody has come into the museum through one door and will need to leave through another door. But in the meantime, they may very well have arranged to have met a family member or a friend at the original location. So they might want to go back against the flow, against the one-way system to the original door. If you explain why this can't happen and the reasons why these measures have been put into place for the safety of members of the public themselves and members of staff, then normally you are able to sort of diffuse a complaint, and giving them the proper information is important. And at the end of the day, if you still haven't been able to resolve a problem, then please do ask for a supervisor or a manager, and they will be able to help you. Key phrases to think about when sort of working with the public and dealing with any potential complaints or challenges or difficult situations are, I understand your concerns and I hear what you're saying. These are active listening techniques. It's often good for you to repeat what they're talking about. So I understand your concerns about the one-way system, and I hear what you're saying about wanting to go back to the original location. So by repeating what they were originally saying, it means it shows them you have properly listened to what they're saying. Maybe we can discuss possible solutions. So for instance, it could be a visitor complaining about another member of the public who has been getting too close to them. So the phrase, maybe we can discuss possible solutions, could be, I will watch what that visitor is doing, and when I see them breaking that 2-metre rule, I will approach them and ask them to stick to the 2-metre rule. And then you can use the phrases that we talked about before. So there's a few mixtures of phrases there where you are you're using active listening techniques, and you are trying to resolve a difficult situation that may have come out of a fear or anxiety about the way other people have been behaving. Anyway, I told you it was short, only 20 minutes or so. I hope that's been useful for you. As I said, I'm Nikki. I'm the Open Doors Project Coordinator for the University of Cambridge Museums. My contact details are on the screen in front of you. If anyone wants to get in touch with me to discuss anything else or talk about any other warm welcome training that you might want to attend, please do so. And at the end of the day, I'm really excited about the museum's reopening. And I know members of the public are desperate to come and come into our cultural venues again and just start experiencing fun days out. And we want to be there and we want to be open for them, but we want to do this in a way that is safe for our staff and therefore safe for the visitors as well. Thank you so much for your time, and I really look forward to you after lockdown is finished. Bye bye.